Welcome back to my YouTube channel, Desmond IRL, and today the word of the day is ignorant. And same as my other videos, I think that we're gonna have like 4 different points that I kind of talk through. And as always, starting with the first point, it's gonna be, how do we necessarily, define the word ignorance? I think for the title of this video, or at least the thumbnail, I'm gonna have it say ignorance, necessity or hindrance. We're gonna get into the first point, which is defining ignorance. So I would say for myself, ignorance is quite an interesting word. I think there's this element of choice included within the word, in the sense that like ignorance is not just a lack of knowledge, but it's also a willingness to not, chase or strive to have said lack of knowledge. And that's kind of how I think of it. And this can involve literally anything, things that pertain to our life, things that pertains to the lives of those around us, the people that we see in the world, people in other countries. I think there's a lot that we can potentially be ignorant about, and a lot of that can be time and place, but it can also be just being so focused on just what we see around us and what is available to us. So that's kind of the way that I am thinking about ignorance. And one thing that I am putting into practice is also looking at Merriam-Webster's definition of ignorance. And so as of now, it says ignorance is the state or fact of being ignorant, lack of knowledge, education, or awareness. And I think I also want to look at some synonyms. So we have unfamiliarity, we have innocence, we have cluelessness, unawareness, obliviousness. So innocence is quite an interesting, I feel like, choice, because it makes me think of like, a young child and someone who's very young. I have like a nephew who's like 6, and there are certain responsibilities of knowledge that we don't expect of children. So in that way, they are indeed ignorant of a lot of things, even within their own lives, but also within the world. So there's this element of responsibility that we don't put on them. But then you have, adults who, there are certain people who don't vote. There's certain people who don't engage with politics. And in that case, there is a responsibility from these people as citizens to engage with the city, the state, the town, the country, the continent that they live in. There's a responsibility to engage, because so much of the actions that we make or inaction, it does indeed affect others. And I want to make sure I'm not jumping the gun, but there is one thing that I was reading that I thought was really interesting. There are actually 2 things. I want to make sure I'm not jumping it too early, but this one take that I was reading, it says that ignorance is immoral. Every human has a duty to reasonably focus on issues that impact the world. And I'm not going to read everything that it says, but essentially it says that you cannot just live your own life and completely be ignorant and unaware of issues that are causing unnecessary, preventable death and destruction and lowering quality of life for billions of people, or are permanently degrading the earth/environment. People justify this by claiming that they're not hurting anybody, but this is a superficial and weak argument. And action can be as bad as action in some contexts, and in others it is not as bad, but still unjustifiable. We are all connected to some degree. So yes, inaction can and does hurt people. Too many people just do their regular life tasks like work, school, and spend 100% of their free time on TikTok and such. I know everyone needs entertainment. I know some people have a lot to work. Some people have to work a lot. But again, I see one too many people being absolutely ignorant, careless about seeking knowledge on important issues that are impacting not just others, but themselves through an indirect but actual change of connections. And I think that point is kind of getting into what I was saying before about ignorance isn't an individual characteristic. To be ignorant of something is to be separate from a body of knowledge or an existence of whatever thing, whatever entity that you're imagining, is to fully separate yourself from that thing. And there's this element of responsibility involved. So that separation is, in a way, intentional, regardless of if it's intentional or not, or if you perceive it to be intentional, if you're the one committing the act of ignorance, which that's not like an attack. If you're the one committing the act of ignorance, it also may not be something that, you know, you're aware of. It can also be this thing that, you know, you're unaware of. You're unaware of the act itself of ignorance, but you're also unaware of the effect of the ignorance itself. So there's like two things that are happening at the same time. That was kind of a lot, but I think point number 2 is why you should never be ignorant to things that pertain to you. I think this, and I feel like I have a lot to say about this point, but to be in a state of ignorance, in a way, it can also be self-harm. I think in terms of what I was saying before, if we want to localize it a bit, when we think about local elections, you know, within your city, whichever level, you know, from a city like mine, live in Jackson, Mississippi, or a city like LA or New York City that have millions of residents. Yeah, when you have the difference between those two cities, like big and small, I feel like it's still important to be cognizant of what's happening at the local level, of who you're voting to be your officials. I feel like the act of not voting or doing research about who is wanting to take, you know, mayoral office, I feel like there's a certain level of harm that you're doing by not, you know, doing your due diligence as a voter and putting someone in a position of power who can actually work towards the things that you want to see in the city that you live in. I feel like that is a pretty easy example. I think also too, to personalize it a bit more, I think, you know, we can be ignorant about health. We can be ignorant about the things that we eat. We can be ignorant about, you know, the lifestyle that we have, you know, in terms of just getting enough sleep, exercising, making sure that we're eating vegetables and fruits. I think it's important not to be ignorant about the things that at a very basic level keep us alive, you know, such as like, you know, getting enough protein per day, drinking enough water, getting enough hours per sleep, you know, getting enough hours of sleep per night. I feel like these are things that we should not, you know, be ignorant about. I would say that goes more into things that are necessary, but also the things that we care about, the things that give us pleasure, the things that give us joy. I think it's important to seek out the stuff that you love, the stuff that you care about, because it's those things that, you know, begin to define who you are. And I feel like I'm jumping the gun just a little bit, but I think it goes into that point of, you know, why you should never be ignorant about things that pertain directly to you. I think it just increases your quality of life to just know more about yourself, and that way, you know, you can give others a better experience, others who are getting to experience the person that you are. I think it is our due diligence, not only to others but to ourselves, to understand ourselves through and through in all aspects. And that involves, you know, taking care of ourselves. That involves finding the things that we enjoy, things that give us joy, things that make us happy. Overall, it just increases your quality of life. My next point is point number 3, why you will always be ignorant. And I know it kind of contradicts point 2, which is why you should never be ignorant. And this gets kind of into what I'm thinking about for the title, ignorance, necessity or hindrance. It is the existence of ignorance that has gotten us to the place we are now as a society, as human beings. Obviously, this is a bit out there, but I think the idea of space exploration, being completely unaware of, you know, how space operates, unaware of how gravity operates, like the scientists who have figured out, you know, these once conundrums have gotten us closer to more advancements in science and innovations in just like how we live throughout the world and how we experience and exist with technology and our understanding of technology. I think ignorance, being this kind of pre-state of being, is what allowed for all these other things to begin to take place. I think there will always be things that, you know, we are just unaware of, that we are oblivious to. Obviously, it depends on what kind of career that you choose. Me doing architecture, I have a greater understanding of architecture and how buildings work and how buildings are put together, the construction process, materiality, form, styles. I have a lot more understanding of these things than maybe the average day person, but that's because this is the career that I'm choosing to study. So it would make sense that I am not as ignorant as most people. And also, there isn't this expectation for everyone to have, you know, the same understanding of me as a person who just graduated with my master's of architecture, or as someone who's been in the field for, let's say, 40 years, 20 years, 30 years. Like me as of now, I am not expected to have the level of knowledge that those people have. So I think this pertains to every other subject matter, because there's a lot to be learned on this earth. There's a lot to be learned about other people, other countries, other continents, nations. There's just a lot to be desired. There's a lot to be researched. And a lot of this, when I think about it, it can give you motivation to want to, close the gap on, what you don't know and what you do know about a particular subject. If it happens, it won't happen with everything. But I think with me being in school for the past 6 years and having conversations with, a lot of other people who are studying different things, I'm always just very curious of, how and why they know the things that they know, how they're able to speak on such topics. And it just pushes me, to want to read. I think, as I was mentioning in my last video, goals, I think reading is going to be an important thing for me. And I think it's an important thing for anyone to just bridge that gap of what you don't know and what you do know. And that takes me to my next point, which is point 4. Define for yourself what you care about and choose, what you want to be knowledgeable of, what you know and don't know. And however you choose to spend your time researching, enveloping yourself in, or the lack thereof, will dictate your life. So therefore you have to decide, what those things are. You have to decide what it is that you care about, what you're choosing to spend your time doing. Because essentially, when we breathe our last breath, our life will be the result of the things that we chose day in and day out. And I feel like I know the things, or at least as of now, being 24, I have an understanding of what it is that, I want to be less ignorant about. I think it's important to spend a lot of time deciding for yourself what it is that you want to do. For most of my early life, I was involved in art and visual art. So drawing, painting, all kinds of printmaking, pyrography, photography, Photoshop. That was a lot of what I spent my time doing. That in a way helped me transition to architecture. So I have my Bachelor of Science in Architecture, and I recently just graduated with my MArch, my Master's of Architecture from UC Berkeley. I feel like doing architecture as a degree has opened up a lot more, to be discovered, a lot more to be interested in. I think I have interest in fashion. I think obviously I have interest in making videos, editing videos. I have an interest in graphic design. I have an interest in playing the guitar and making music. I think what architecture has opened for me is this idea of process, of ideation, the process of coming up with an idea, of fleshing out how you came to the idea and also the results of it. And I think it's such a creative career, at least, as I've been doing it academically. And even though I haven't felt as creative as when I was doing art, I think it's still a very, very creative act. And I think I want to keep this chain of starting new things, new creative things that, I spend a lot of time with, and that they eventually develop into, skills that I am just very proficient at. One being, guitar. That's like one thing I haven't really gotten into as of yet, but I'm hoping, to be more consistent with it. Making these videos is something that I hope to be more consistent with it. Like the last video that I just made, I'm using, Premiere Pro. I'm figuring out a better workflow for myself. I'm trying to make better thumbnails. I was just texting a friend about like these things that I'm figuring out as I'm doing it more and more, such as, learning to cut the gaps between, saying one word to another if it's a long enough gap. Just making that much more clean, having the transitions for the music, the audio that I have in the background be more consistent, clear, and also better transitions for it. So, and that's what I mean by like starting a new thing. There's a lot of ignorance that we have when we start, but as you stick with it, you begin to close the gap of what you don't know and what you do know. But you will never reach, and that's getting back to my third point, why you will always be ignorant. You will never reach a point where you know 100% about any given subject that you're doing. You will always have this gap of what you know and what you don't know, because you will never be able to really comprehend everything there is to know about a given subject. I don't think that's required of life. I don't think there's a requirement to have everything that we do and focus on be 100% understood. I think, as I was saying before, our responsibility is to, it's the intent that matters. It's the intent of wanting to have knowledge about stuff and pursuing it. I think that in of itself is enough. And ultimately, the acknowledgement of that intent and the action behind it is, as I said in my fourth point, what will begin to define your life. and how you choose to live it, and how your life begins to affect others. Because every decision that we make, every decision, indecision, lack of action, everything that we do does not exist in a vacuum. Our decisions affect ourselves, but they also affect other people. So I guess to end this video, I will say that ignorance is not an isolated act. We have to exercise precaution with the things that we choose to spend our time with. We have to also exercise intentionality, and we have to decide that the things that we want to spend our time doing and looking into and researching is important enough to therefore do it in the most appropriate manner. Yeah, I would say these are questions that you can ask yourself, you know, just define for yourself what these things are, because ultimately they will end up dictating your life. I don't know if I answered the question necessarily, if ignorance is a necessity or hindrance, or maybe it's both. I think it can be a necessity for certain things. I think we are required to be ignorant about the things that we don't know, so that we have a desire or motivation or discipline to want to pursue it, to not be as ignorant anymore. But I think also ignorance can be a hindrance. I think both things can be true. And I think it's important for us to look more closely into this word and to observe where it might be present in our lives and decide how we want to move forward with that knowledge or lack of knowledge. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. If this video inspired you or made you think differently about something, maybe leave a comment explaining how. If you enjoy my content, you know, maybe consider leaving a like, maybe consider subscribing, or leaving a comment for how, you know, I can increase the quality, or what I could have said differently, or what you disagree with. Any engagement is welcome. But ultimately, thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. Yeah, that's the end of my video. My name is Desmond Young, and my YouTube channel name is Desmond IRL. Thank you.